voice back are the deciding factors in bringing about lasting peace in our country. In the open and new Myanmar, loads of funds are being made available under the heading of peace. For those advocating change in Myanmar, I would caution them not to undermine local initiatives, as the reality is that local agendas are wider to bring about true democracy and lasting peace. Interestingly, over the last 20 years, scarcity of aid in our country had actually created more room for local agencies to determine eventual programming. Had we been flooded with aid after the 1990 elections, local NGOs like Myanmar Egress, Mita, Pangu, EcoDev, Shalom, to name few, would not have had the chance to grow and flourish as they have done. It is ironic that now that the country has become more open, more challenges are being faced to strengthen civil society. To those who think Myanmar civil society groups do not have the capacity to act as agents of change, let me give this example. Since 2008, before women become a special target for funders, a local group of women have been self-funding a mission to strengthen women from the home to the community to the nation. Working as a small group with no staff, they first conducted research on women's awareness of sexual issues in Yangon. It revealed that most young women who had to take bus to school and work faced serious sexual harassment in this daily activity. No one had done anything about it, although everyone seemed to know about it. In an evolving growth of knowledge and self-confidence, the women gathered over 300 volunteers in less than a month to launch a campaign called Whistle for Help to stop this ugly behavior. They distributed over 30,000 whistles and information sheets in 1 month. The campaign was the first led by women for their own benefit in the country's history, accomplished without outside determination of need, funding, or under women empowerment. What happened in Kachin State last November is another good case study. In the wake of clashes between Burmese government forces and the Kachin Independence Army around Mangsi Township, up to 3,000 Kachin villagers were forced to flee their homes. After trekking through the jungle to escape the fighting, these internally displaced Kachins were met with trucks organized by local NGOs and brought to safety. This incident clearly shows that local NGOs are in a better position to operate more efficiently in assisting the internally displaced persons. They are the lead agency and have the local context. They are from the areas, speak the local languages, with a working history which gave them more access even to conflict zones. They have managed to find ways to reach IDPs, even on the other side of the Myanmar border, traveling between the border and the conflict zones. This also means that they were often able to reach the IDPs in the most difficult times. Because of their efforts, no IDP has died of hunger. They are, however, very much in need of funding. On the overall IDP situation, there are currently about 500,000 IDPs countrywide, with about half of them in Kachin and Rakhine, living in appalling conditions and in need of urgent humanitarian help in spite of the basic help which local NGOs, above all in Kachins, can and do supply. In addition to providing for the basic needs of these innocent civilians caught up in the crossfire of conflicts, we need to explore existing and potential solutions to ensure their protection and rights. On an encouraging note, although it is true that most of the IDP's population is generated under the current government, more opportunities to improve the situation have opened up with increased visibility, reduced isolation, and increased access. Space has opened up for the media to report freely and the international community to be better informed of what is actually happening on the ground. With regard to how the Burmese, the ethnic majority group, view ethnic minorities, a couple of quotes I found stuck away in apparently non-contentious articles to be quite disquieting and revealing. Nobel Peace Prize winner and opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi, on her recent visit to Chin State, was quoted in the Irrawaddy as saying, quote, "The government should keep in touch with ethnic people to learn what they need," unquote. To me, the quote comes across as saying, we the government, we the NLD, we the Burmese, we look after you. The way I see it, if the government includes true representatives of the ethnic peoples, not just those that are centrally handpicked, they will make sure their constituents' interests and needs are heard and attended to. And that is what federalism is all about. On a similar note, Dr. Dagmar Hellmann Rajanayagam of the University of Passau, Germany, in her paper, Approximations to the Kachins, explains why the British were caught so off-guarded in 1946 when the Kachins opted for independence and union with the Burmese and other ethnic groups. She writes, "In hindsight, it is not really difficult to see why. The Kachins were treated by the British something like the norms of Harry Potter fame. The useful and loyal, but in the first place slightly dumb and easily led lesser beings, who are supposed to exist to serve the higher wizards." The perceptions of the British were colored by their own interests. They presumed to speak for the Kachins, but rarely bothered to find out what the latter actually thought and wanted. I sincerely hope today's Burmese, the elites and the more educated, do not have the Harry Potter wizard syndrome. Another instance, which is equally appalling, is a draft from a government committee overseeing the comprehensive education sector review. The committee is apparently appointed and doesn't include outside educational experts. Section 2 includes a description of education goals, which says the students have to be taught to have the right idea based on Myanmar national characteristics. Right idea? With you? Only Myanmar national characteristics? What of all the other ethnic groups? Many were horrified to think how this could be interpreted or put into practice. On the positive side, these objections and queries have been put up to the committee for review. Unless we resolve the underlying political issues, which are the root causes of armed conflict, crises caused by human rights violations, displacement, poverty, drugs, corruption, militarization, and the culture of using rape as a weapon will not go away. This could lead to an eventual return to square one of a centralized authoritarian government. This horrific road has been traveled before many times in the past 7 decades. To sum up, the hard work begins. Constitutional reform, legal reform, investment reform, redefining the role of the military, tackling systematic corruption, sustainable economic development, restoring rights to public education and healthcare, continued human rights and environmental abuses. All this will take many years. Needless to say, an enabling environment in which civil society can thrive is vital. Leaders and members of Asia Pacific nations, over the years, you have shared our burden in assisting the many refugees, migrants, internally displaced, prisoners of conscience, and students in requiring further educational opportunities. Many of your countries have recognized the positive changes in our country and have resumed past relationships. May I take this opportunity to appeal for your perseverance in working towards the goal of regenerating the diverse societies of Myanmar. I honestly believe that a steadfast regional commitment will be vital in resolving two major conflicts that currently plague Myanmar, the Kachin War and the sectarian strife in Rakhine, both of which have ramifications far beyond our borders. To conclude, let me reiterate there will be no lasting peace settlement in Myanmar unless there's a just and equitable relationship among the various ethnic groups and faith communities in the country. Failure to achieve this will only perpetuate long-standing conflicts, human suffering, and political crisis, with the potential of straining once again Myanmar's relations with the international community. ขอบคุณค่ะ Gratitude Basa.
Thank you very much, Seng Lahpai, our keynote speaker, for a very inspiring and very moved speech. Now I would like to invite Associate Professor Pongpet Thanasin to give a token of appreciation to Seng Lahpai. Thank you very much. We are raised behind our schedule and we apologize for that. Now it's the next session is the plenary one session, which Professor Anan Ganjanapan is going to be the chair of that session. Professor Anan, please.
Welcome everyone to our first plenary session. The topic for today is Transformative Challenge for Sociology in Asia and Pacific. In fact, we should have 3 speakers, but our colleague from India cannot join us. But I think we're going to have Professor Luchira to read the statement from our speaker from India. But anyway, we will have another 2 colleagues. My good friend, where is he? One Sawavi from University of Brunei Darussalam. Please, Professor Ibrahim Sawavi. One Sawavi Ibrahim. Is he here? I cannot see him. And we have also Professor Hosekawa Koichi from Tohoku University. Please, oh, please, Professor Ruchara, yeah? Can we have? Hey, Wan Sawavi, where are you? Huh? Oh, long paper? You can do whatever you want. Okay, we don't have that much time, so I think we should start our session now. Yeah, I think I would like Professor Ruchara to, I don't know, I forgot the name of the speaker. Okay, you can read. Okay, she will read the paper. Too bad, but anyway, from what we have, all three speakers, it will represent our region, Asia Pacific region. I mean, few decades ago, we might not realize that this will be possible, to have such well-known speakers, from main countries in Asia, like India, Japan. One used to be in Malaysia, but now in Brunei, whatever, it's still part of Asia. This is more realistic now as a region, Asia Pacific. And of course, it's not just becoming a reality, but we also face a lot of challenge. And during this kind of transformation, and I hope that our speaker will give us some idea about how they are looking at how to face this kind of challenge. Okay, I would like Professor Ruchara to start first. Without further ado, since we don't have that much time. Okay.
Let's see. Well, as you can see, I'm under here under false pretenses, pretending to be Professor Maitreyi Chowdhury from Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. Professor Chowdhury is the chair of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. They're very big shoes to fill, and the paper is rather long, so I'm just trying to juggle as to what to do about it. I will read parts of the paper, which will obviously be very truncated. I had hoped that we would be able to make multiple copies of the paper and make them available to you, and I hope we can still do that. If not, it'll be up on the website for you to read, because I think it's a very important paper concerning the state of sociology today. Is the sound coming through? Is that all right? Okay. Righto. Firstly, she makes all the thanks to the organisers, etc. I'll start from the point that, for indeed we're located at a historical moment when social transformation appears to be an overwhelming presence, redefining macro structures such as the market and the state on the one hand, and reshaping the most intimate aspects of our personal, private lives on the other. Globalization is a buzzword even as we today are engulfed within a process of social transformation, both intense and far-sweeping. My concern, however, is that there appears to be a taken-for-granted understanding of globalization. It is often defined in terms of visible attributes and features such as consumer culture, new gadgets, migration, urbanization, media flows, knowledge economy, and so on, or expressed in succinct phrases such as time-based compression, without further engagement with the deep structures and processes that render this compression possible. The key question that I would like to raise in this context here today is, how do we understand and analyze this ongoing social transformation? How is sociology specially equipped to study the ongoing processes? My key contention is that we need to re-look afresh into the intellectual resources of sociology to grapple with contemporary changes. I argue that since the very birth and growth of sociology arose in a context of far-reaching intellectual and institutional changes generated by the revolutionary ideas of the Enlightenment, social transformation unleashed by the rise of industrial capitalism, the democratic upsurge initiated by the French Revolution, sociology has much to offer to help us understand what is happening around us. This inextricable relationship between social change and the very birth and the rise of sociology, I argue, equips it with the body of tools to study and theorize the empirical. Further, this very relationship underscores the deep connections between democracy and sociology as a science of society. You may ask, how are the sociological and social theory of an era long past gone be of any use today? You may ask me, what connection does those events in distant 18th and 19th century Europe have with changes happening here in our part of the world? Often one hears how the founding thinkers, that was a Freudian slip, founding thinkers Karl Marx, Max Weber and Emile Durkheim have lost their relevance. I differ. As theorists of modernity and pioneers of social science inquiry, we have much to learn in a world of rapid industrial capitalism and deepening structures of both modernity and democracy. The rich and diverse themes ranging from different dimensions of globalization, such as urbanism, urbanization, migration, and new forms of democratization, that this conference will address captures the complexities involved in the transformative challenges for sociology in the Asia-Pacific region. I'm not going to take up any of those themes listed for this conference, but I would like to remark that they, in one face of its sense, captures the real, empirical, pressing issues of the day. Does that suggest in some way that the imperative task before social science today is to address and provide solutions to resolve them? Does that imply pursuing theoretical questions is a futile exercise, neither relevant nor desirable? Does it mean that we can study urbanization and migration, transnationalism, social media, sans theory, to mention a few of the themes that this conference addresses? Or do we need a theory of contemporary social, political, economic and cultural and its various linkages to make sense of the whole? And can such a theory be possible without due attention to analysis of deep structures, whether of capitalism or of collective agencies of people infused by democratic ideas who at once negotiate with and challenge constraints of these structures? How often have sociologists of my generation spoken of sociology as equipped with a holistic approach that seeks to study a web of social relations? How often spoken of it ritualistically without due attention to what it implies of how we ought to study an object of inquiry theoretically and methodologically? The basic thrust of my talk today, therefore, is to counter this widespread belief in the irrelevance of theory and argue that some of the key challenges that sociology faces today, and she's got several bullet points which I'll go through. First, a disconnect between theory and empirical research that strengthens the belief that doing theory is a bit of kite flying and has little to offer in actual empirical research. A two-pronged tendency that strengthens abstracted empiricism. One, a tendency to collect data without either historical perspective or a theory of society. Two, a tendency for dense language and deployment of that sound theoretical, but which does not lead to any better understanding of society. A belief that much of social science theory is Western theory, unsuitable and inappropriate to our empirical reality. Prevalence of an inadequate understanding of theory methods with a tendency in some quarters to use theory as ornamental and in other quarters to make a fetish of method. The view that in a transformed context of globalization, classical theorists have been rendered irrelevant. The paradox that even as we shun theory in research, we teach theory in most parts of the world as a necessary requirement to master the discipline. And there's a subheading, Teaching and Research, Locations and Theory. I begin with the last point that I made regarding teaching and research. This link, unfortunately, on the decline, to my mind is extremely important for what I wish to put forward here today. It helps to appreciate why national and regional contexts matter so much, even as we speak of global flows. For as of now, we tend to predominantly teach within the national context. I would like to, with some degree of emphasis, therefore, call for a certain attention to contexts and histories. And I do this as much from my location as a teacher as a researcher in India. For perhaps nothing more than this experience at the intersection of teaching and research that has afforded me a different and, to my mind, a critical vantage point of how intellectual traditions merge, travel, and settle down in unexpected ways within sociology and other social science syllabi alike, or become reigning tropes in research and scholarship. In other words, I'm arguing that when one seeks to map out and gauge scholarship, one needs to do so not just in terms of texts as pure abstract products of intellectual engagement, but products of messy institutional contexts. This is not surprising, for institutions are located within the complex dynamics that are constitutive of societies. Not surprisingly, therefore, the contemporary sociology classroom, with its myriad contestations and aspirations, class, gender, caste, tribe, community, religion, region, and race, is such a fruitful site to make sense of the transformative challenges to sociology. Linked to this matter of context and travels is the matter of hierarchies within the global academia. For even as calls for internationalization is the order of the day in both North America and Europe, the North still does occupy privileged positions so far as legitimacy of knowledge is concerned. This, I argue, holds good even as increasing number of scholars of Asian origin play a leading role within the North American universities and bolster the burgeoning field of post-colonial studies, with which we in Asia now learn to see ourselves anew. In other words, I argue that national location of academia, and not so much of national origins, within which sociology is being taught and written upon, continue to matter, even as ideas and paradigms now flow rapidly across borders. And call for provincializing Europe grows much stronger. This is a global context within which I speak. This is the point that anchors my talk, and I shall be tempted to return to it at different points of my talk to ask whether the term post-colonialism adequately captures the decades of rich scholarship that sociologists, feminists, and historians in Asia have produced. Further and importantly, the story of the discipline itself may bear strong and distinct national trajectories linked with both institutional and intellectual histories. For instance, Indian sociology has been substantial consideration on the relationship between sociology and social anthropology. It is a story apart, significant for sociology in our parts, but both inconsequential and invisible in Western academia, even in global context. Evident, therefore, is the fact that locations define to a very great extent the kind of questions being asked and theories being deployed. Post-colonial theory, I would argue, therefore, emerged in a Western context, even as the non-Western historical trajectory was privileged. There are two examples which I would like to give to buttress my point. One is that I have mentioned above the centrality of disciplinary debates between sociology and social anthropology in India, completely invisible in the West. Other is an exercise I conducted very recently on the questions being raised by feminists in Indian and feminists in the West at the same period. The question of Indian origin feminists in the North were asking was centrally about locations of Asians in North America, of the universal quote-unquote and specific intellectual. Location is a term that gained both popularity and urgency at a specific point of time within Western academia, in particularly US Academy in the 1980s. The key question appears to be what happens to the Asian or other non-Western scholar after they reach the West. But maybe what we need to ask, what was happening here then? For many of those who lived through those years here know that a whole different set of questions were being debated and raised. But they remain specific to our context and never quite acquired the general questions of social science. What was happening here in the 1980s? Locations did matter, but not quite in the way articulated elsewhere. The question resident Indian feminists were asking were different. A rich body of scholarship was produced through the 80s, 90s, and into this century. Questions were being raised about interlinkages between culture and economy, gender and kinship and politics. Questions were being raised about limits of narrow Western frameworks to explain complex Asian realities. Yet these early intersectional works did not capture global attention as the finest examples of intersectional analysis. We had to wait for the term to be coined in the North to have a name for what we were doing for a long time, much like being re-cherished post-colonial. The broad point that I seek to make here is twofold. One, that the intersection of research and teaching is extremely important on engaging with questions of here and now. And two, that notwithstanding the instant global flow of knowledge and images, national locations matter, regional locations matter, and intellectual and institutional hierarchies matter, even when recast in a global context. Now that takes me up to page 5. So I might just go to the conclusion. How's that? I mean, there's wonderful stuff here about the university and the national public sphere and reference to Habermas is made here about the public sphere. So that's about 2 pages, which I think I can read comfortably. So please forgive the disjointed character of this talk. My key contention is that what is taking place in contemporary India, and this I think would be comparable to other states, is a reframing of what constitutes the national project. For the moment, we go with the idea of the liberal concept of the public sphere, referring to Habermas, is the essential for the emergence of the modern national university. The question that looms large in present-day India is what happens when the public sphere itself has openly transcended the national borders and reflects global concerns. At one level, global concerns such as global peace or global ecology are indeed more desirable than narrow national concerns. The crux of the matter, however, lies in who defines global concerns. I would argue that what is presently taking place is an apparently unchallenged ascendancy of the corporate vision in defining the national and the global. The national bourgeoisie and the transnational capitalist class cannot possibly pursue the same agenda. My contention is that society like India is undergoing precisely this conflict and negotiation of very different visions of the nation and what it represents. Not surprisingly, we have a serious look at our state of higher education. The report of a particular committee was submitted on March 1st, 2009. It begins with the idea of the university, restating ideas not so different from the idea of freedom articulated by Hohenthal in the Western context. I quote, "A university is a place where new ideas germinate, strike roots, and grow tall and sturdy. It's a unique space which covers the entire universe of knowledge. It is a place where creative minds converge, interact with each other, and construct visions of new realities. Established notions of truth are challenged in the pursuit of knowledge. The invocation of the university," quote, "as the trustee of the humanities tradition," unquote, is accompanied by a somewhat contrary view that university education is no longer viewed as a good in itself, but also as a stepping stone into higher orbit of the job market, where the student expects a concrete monetary return, and consequently, in this perception, the university of today is expected to be in tune with the emerging needs of society, unquote. For university education is no longer a place only for the socially privileged students, and therefore the matter of employability and skills become even more crucial. I have no quarrel with this affirmation of democratic principles, but I would like to argue that this formulation seems to suggest that the humanities tradition of university education is essentially an elite project. Yet recent sociological writings in our parts of the world show some of the most interesting conceptual challenges of mainstream Indian sociology has come from the margins. An equally important point, however, is that our penchant to be politically correct ought not to blind us to the fact that the practice of sociology, whether in the centre or on the margins, is often dismal and banal. I, however, strongly argue that if one were to overlook the mundane, dreary, unimaginative practice of everyday sociology in classrooms spread across the country, one would miss the essential point that sociology and its irrelevance. At this point, one needs to reiterate that corporate heads today are not just fettered for their achievement in the corporate spheres, but also seen as intellectual visionaries who would know what is best for education of the country. The corporate vision has become the legitimate national vision through a certain degree of unease, though a certain degree of unease may have started to be felt within the state of corporate structures. C.N. Rao, scientific advisor to the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, commented, quote, "If you are worried about economic competitiveness and not worried about scientific competitiveness, then I think the future will be bleak," unquote, Times of India, blah, blah, blah. Kiran Karnik, NASSCOM president, too, while reiterating that the future of India is linked to the knowledge industries and our success in these depends upon how well we mature and grow on human resources, warned how it is important not to convert professional education into polytechnic training. In this new world of pragmatism, theoretical and ideological debates are seen with some relief as remnant of a well-read past. Teaching is seen as a tool, but not really something that cannot be replaced by other means that could range from virtual teaching to online programs. The teacher-student relationship is transformed to a service provider-customer one. Criticisms about armchair academics and teachers become sharper within the academic disciplines happen to be social sciences or humanities. The need of the hour is perceived to redesign disciplines to be more useful, quote unquote. Critical debate in the public sphere certainly falls outside the ambit of the useful. India's first Minister of Education, Humayun Kabir, had argued in the 1950s that higher education's abstractness is its saving virtue, for it gives to such education a universal aspect. In the new context of the practical turn, useful knowledge, skill enhancement, and market competitiveness, the four practices that distinguish a liberal arts education, namely critical thinking, examination of life, encounters with difference and free exchanges of ideas, are in danger. A liberally educated person should be capable of principled judgment, seeking to understand the origins, context, and implications of any area of study rather than looking exclusively at its application. My effort in this paper is to argue that the sociological tradition is potentially able to be at the forefront of liberal education. This, however, would be possible only if we reassert the urgent need to theorize, drawing from older resources, but with a critical look at new challenges that we face today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you can see that we still insist on a long tradition of social science, that it have to be critical and reflexive, and we cannot just go to the practice without having discussion on the theory. Anyway, we don't have much time to really summarizing the long paper. I think I would like to go to Wan Savavi on the transformative challenge for sociology in Southeast Asia. Please.
Thank you very much, Anan. Good morning, everybody. And I would like to convey my thanks to Professor Chayan and Professor Surchai for inviting me to this very auspicious occasion. I believe that I am representing actually many of my colleagues who are from the region, Southeast Asia. Even though I'm presenting this, I hope that I'll be speaking on their behalf. And essentially, we have come a long way from the age of have now begun to become our own sociologists, our own social scientists, our own researchers. Once we used to be the other, the object of research. But we have now, from this region of Southeast Asia or Asia, we have generated our own anthropologists, our own sociologists, and we are doing research with our own people, and sometimes cross-cultural research, different countries in Southeast Asia. And I believe this is the academic journey of the new generation, at least few generations now, including Anan, of the Southeast Asian scholar, sociologist. My own experience, like many others, taken me to Australia for my PhD education in anthropology, coming back to Malaysia to do my own research. I went to a plantation and searching for the working class, looking for Marx, class-conscious proletarians, and looking for the class consciousness. I mean, that was the 70s, the 80s. It was very much that kind of tradition. But we came back. We came back to our own geographical location, and basically to be involved in research. And of course, questioning at that time the kind of research that had been done by some of our colonial mentors, because we were part of that, colonial knowledge as well. Now, so today's presentation is essentially is a kind of reflection. It's based on my own reflection, based on my own academic journey as an anthropologist, social scientist, sociologist, whatever you can call it, because I try not to differentiate between anthropology and sociology in the context of where we are now. And these reflections are essentially epistemological question. Essentially, it's about how knowledge is produced, how knowledge is organized, how knowledge is interpreted. So let me begin. I quote here Kawayama.
You can
It's okay, I can read it. Who in his latest work talk about, I guess, the periphery and center in terms of knowledge production. And Southeast Asia basically as the periphery of that knowledge and practical production, center versus periphery. And I also cite Victor King's analysis of Southeast Asian sociology in his latest volume on sociology of Southeast Asia, where he talks about the underdevelopment of Southeast Asian sociology, and very much citing Hans Eber's observation of the visible knowledge dependency among Southeast Asian sociologists on theoretical ideas from outside. So essentially in Kuyayama's analysis, the center becomes the producer of theoretical knowledge, and the periphery simply reduced as an empirical reservoir for theory building and knowledge production for those at the center. Now, Appadurai talks about his global scapes, and I feel there is a kind of missing link here, missing scape, and this scape that is missing is basically addresses to the social science knowledge scape. Because I think there is a similar flow of global social science knowledge vis-a-vis the scape, which binds us together, whether we are talking about, center, periphery, or semi-periphery. And of course, this is already established through university institution, through journals, through publishers, through research, through conferences. This whole scape is mediated already, for a long time. So I think there is the need to acknowledge this state, that there is this state that binds us together. Like today is a great example of manifestation of our meeting together, sharing this state. And therefore then the possibilities of transnationalizing, translocalizing knowledge theory between Southeast Asian sociologists and Southeast Asianists from the center or the semi-periphery. Eric Thompson is there. He recently wrote an article, importantly, very important, about transnational anthropology, which is fast beginning in Southeast Asia. And that, I think, very much a commentary on the need to basically forge this new transnational scholarly networking in which we all partake in the production of knowledge, dissemination of knowledge, and sharing of this knowledge, and essentially coming together to dialogue based on our own different research experiences, like today. So what is interesting here is we can create a critical social science network through collaborative research, dialogue, conferencing, and publication through such networking. Now, I'm coming from Malaysia, where my former president, he'll be giving one of the keynote speakers tomorrow, Professor Ramanambo. He used to be the president of the Malaysian Institute of Social Sciences. Now, we do a kind of Malaysian Studies conference every 2 years, which is international. And the conference has become a landmark in terms of bringing scholars from all over the world who are doing research on Malaysian society, sharing their knowledge with us, and of course, giving critical commentaries on each other's work. And of course, we're also involved in publication. And of course, what is so important is to share a similar critical social science perspective in deconstructing Orientalist and Eurocentric discourses. For instance, from my part of the world, I'm sure you are aware of the work of Syed Hussein Alatas, The Captive Mind, The Myth of the Lazy Native, whose work basically preceded cultural studies, where I think his work becomes a seminal work in terms of a critique of the Orientalist discourse on the lazy native, basically on the lazy native in Southeast Asia, that whole form of colonial knowledge was propagated by British colonialism. And I'm sure in India, the subaltern school also plays a very important role in terms of deconstructing this form of colonial knowledge. Not in sociology. Well, as I say, sociological knowledge transverse is into everything. So encountering the allegation of knowledge dependence, as I suggested, stated earlier in one of my PowerPoint, coming from Victor King and Evers, we propose that theory building is cumulative and ongoing. So coming back to the paper from India, theory building is cumulative, even from way back, from Marx, Durkheim, and Weber. Even though we build upon these theories, theory building is still cumulative, ongoing. And that the middle ground is also to move the discourse away from the domain of the abstract, the general and the statistical, to the realm of the concrete, to acknowledge the dialectics between theory building and empirical research finding. Now, this site is not defined by fixity, but is one which I feel, which is graced by fluidity and creativity, hence fostering the possibilities of theoretical multi-layeredness, hybridity, translocality between existing theoretical knowledge from outside and those which arise from localized empirical grounding. I think we forget that theory building is not just about theory, but there is that dialectical relationship between empirical knowledge and theory. It feeds back to theory. So a good example is, whilst the theory and conception of class may have its own classical genealogy derived from Marx and other Western theories, class consciousness as to how it is handled in culture terms, this coming E.P. Thompson, may be greatly expanded by the ideational nuances drawn from the concrete, localized experience of a class in a specific cultural context, whether it's about the peasantry or the laboring class. So the work of James Scott, for instance, is a very good example of this. And my own work in terms of looking at the proletarian and moral economy, where at the level of understanding class consciousness, there is a lot of fluidity in which you can move Marx theory, because Marx theory about class consciousness is not perfect anyway. So it's been, and therefore empirical findings from the periphery can be elevated, can be inputted into theory building. Of course, there is this discourse of indigenizing social science by Farid Alatas and the rest. And my take on that is that the discourse of indigenizing social science in the periphery cannot simply mean the return to a nativistic and essentialist discourse, but that it must be conducted within the framework of critical social science. But while such an undertaking has to confront the epistemological imperatives of a North American style of knowing, coming from Gobenglan, or the intellectual hegemony of the Anglo-American code from Reed, and that there's no going back to Eurocentric legacies, the real challenge is to listen attentively to diverse voices in knowledge making across the insider-outside divide, so as to forge a new universality of knowledge. This is from Gobenglan's latest work. And of course, coming from anthropology, I feel that in the field of indigenous society, the Maori anthropologist Tuhuwai Smith's seminal work on decolonizing methodology has been instrumental in offering an alternative epistemology to the analysis and research of indigenous people. It has moved anthropology beyond postmodernist ethnography to incorporate storytelling and other modes of decolonizing methodologies. And this gave way to indigenous modes of knowledge being articulated or being using anthropology as a vehicle. My own example, for the Dayaks of Kalimantan, the establishment of the Institute of Dayakology has come a long way in paving the way towards the indigenes in writing their own culture. Among the Orang Asli of Peninsular Malaysia, the works of the Orang Asli writer, Akia, with a collection of short stories, a book of poetry, and 3 novels about his own people, Orang Sengkel, Hamba, and the last book, which came out only a week ago, Orang Kecil, is testimony of this